We're back. This is Business Incorporated live on Channels Television. Well, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says the government will enable the development of more than 11,800 megawatts of additional power generation, in addition to the roughly 30,000 megawatts of electricity available on the national grid daily. President Ramaphosa explains that the new energy will be procured from diverse sources, including solar, wind, gas, coal, and storage. He adds that in an effort to facilitate electricity, self-generation, and as part of the reform processes, the government has removed the licensing requirement for self-generation projects. Meanwhile, South Africans are eagerly waiting for what's been described as the worst unemployment statistics so far. The last quarterly statistics released by Statsa shows that South Africa's unemployment rate was at 30%, and the statistician general Risenga Maluluke says this was the first time the country will be hitting 30% mark. Shepo Molloy, an economist at the Bureau for Economic Research, says the country will see a bloodbath of job losses due to the impact of COVID-19.
It would be a bloodbath in terms of the number of jobs, because for the first time, we'll be able to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market, right? So you'd know that a number of analysts, we are forecasting around about 3 million jobs would have been lost as a result of the lockdown-induced COVID-19 measures, lockdown restriction measures, that is. So I think these figures are just going to illustrate the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. But we're expecting the figures to be quite worse than the market anticipates, given that I think for the longest time, and you would also know that Stats SA has also been lagging behind in terms of the release of the official statistics, and that was due to the lockdown measures. They couldn't go out and collect the data. So I think for the first time now, we'll be able to have a true assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. The tourism sector, unlike a number of sectors, they have been on full lockdown, right? So we've also closed international travel, and you would know that the tourism sector benefits fundamentally from international travel, be it in terms of the hotels, be it in terms of some of the entertainment areas as well, right? We also had a protected period of alcohol ban, for example, which is also quite key in terms of supporting the restaurant and the tourism sector. So most definitely the tourism sector has been the far hit sector in terms of COVID-19.
And last week, Zambia asked investors in its US dollar bonds to accept delays in their interest payments into next year in what would be described the first African debt default on private creditors since the pandemic. Now, President Edgar Lungu's government says it was seeking the suspension of debt service payments for a period of 6 months from holders of its $3 billion worth of international bonds beginning in October. And joining us now to talk about the impact of these on business in the country is Matt Kindiger, an associate practice lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Docker Frontier. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the show. Talk us through how Zambia's default on its debts to private creditors will likely affect businesses in the country. And do you expect the government to turn now to the IMF for some kind of a bailout package?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on the program today. So certainly businesses are likely to be affected in Zambia. And I think most importantly, they will be affected by the kwacha, the volatility in the kwacha. So we are expecting to see some more rapid depreciation of the kwacha over the next couple of months as a result of the default. So this could create some planning difficulties. Also, I would say that the prospect of a default has already been priced into the kwacha. So it may not be as volatile as some people expect it to be. We're also expecting there to be difficulties for companies getting access to loans in Zambia. And this is because banks' balance sheets will be under significant pressure in Zambia as a result of the effective default. And in terms of whether the government will look for a loan from the IMF, so it has stated that it is looking for support from the IMF. But even if it does enter into a bailout with the IMF or a program with the IMF, it will probably drag its feet in terms of implementing the provisions of the bailout. And this is because there is an election in 2021, and it probably won't want to implement the difficult and painful measures that the IMF bailout would require.
Well, I recall that looking at the numbers from Eurobonds markets across Africa over the weekend, I mean, Zambia actually got a serious shift from that. A lot of investors shifted from that market to other parts of Africa, other Eurobonds in Africa. But we also know, Matt, that the economy has been one of the most exposed in sub-Saharan Africa to the decline in commodity prices since March this year when the COVID-19 pandemic began. So to what extent will the recent upswing in copper prices help to counterbalance the whole effects or impacts of these on the country's weak public finances at this point?
Yes, so I mean, Zambia has been really badly affected by the decline in global commodity prices, especially copper. So a real shock to the economy, and it's one of the reasons why public finances are in such a bad state this year. And so the upswing in copper prices certainly is welcome, and it does mean that the government's tax revenues will improve a little bit more than we previously expected. But overall, it won't result in an inflammation for public finances. Public debt is too high, the budget deficit is still too large, and this means that the government's revenue base needs to expand much more quickly, much more broadly, in order for there to be a meaningful improvement in public finances. And so we're still also expecting a pretty deep recession this year for Zambia, around about 5% as well. So although higher copper prices are positive, it won't solve the problem.
Well, there's a growing concern about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on public finances across SSA, that's Sub-Saharan Africa. In your view, which countries are most at risk at this point? That's at risk of the debt distress, and are we likely to see more sovereign defaults over the coming months or weeks, in fact, because we're ending the Q3 2020 at this point?
Yes, so, I mean, there's been growing concern about the risk of debt distress and the risk of another default across Sub-Saharan Africa. So there is worry that Zambia will be the first of many. It's worth noting that Mozambique remains in default. It defaulted 2 years ago. There are a couple of countries that we are watching here at Duck Frontier. One is Angola. It has a very high debt-to-GDP ratio, and it really has struggled to adjust to the loss of oil revenues as a result of the oil price crash recently. Chad is also another market that we are looking at. It's also looking for debt relief. And Ethiopia is one on the watch list. It is facing some fiscal pressure. We don't necessarily think these markets will default imminently, but there is increasing risk we will face debt distress over the coming months.
I mean, a lot of these countries are currently seeing a debt-to-GDP ratio of some 60-something% actually. Lord help us all. Well, Matt Kindinga, thank you so much for your analysis. Matt Kindinga is the Associate Practice Lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Duck Frontier. And that's it on the program this afternoon. Thanks for being a part of it. I'm Temple Ashaju. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.